If you have a question, during the process, please go to the chat room and put your question in the chat room. And then Allan and I will go through those as well as we can. And with that, let's see, anybody still waiting in the waiting room? And I thank you all for being here. This could be very informative. Right now, I have everybody in. Betsy just came, I got her in. Okay. Commodore, would you like to address the crowd, and then we'll go ahead with the presentation?
Thank you, Scott. First off, I'd like to thank you, Scott, and Ned for setting up this seminar and getting it going so close to the Bay season. And I just want to remind everybody that 17 days from now, we start chasing roosters. So be sure that you are registered as soon as possible so we can be accurately counting boats and trophies and flags and everything else. If you haven't already, everything is up on our new website, which is exciting. And then we've got some new things that are going to help all of us in terms of having a fun year. Sailing is a kind of a three-pronged sport where you got to get your boat ready, which I'm sure most of you already have done. You have to work on getting your body ready, which for all of us takes a little bit longer as we get older. And then there's also getting the mind ready. And this is a great opportunity for us to learn some things from one of the Bay's own who has, sailed on the Bay growing up and multiple classes, and was here even last weekend, from what I understand. And it's a great opportunity for us to share ideas and thoughts and get excited about moving into the new season. So without any further ado, let me announce our speaker, Allan Terhune, and let's all have a good time and look forward to seeing you on the water.
Well, thank you for that. And thank you, Scott and Ned, for putting this together. And, I'm glad to be here. And it's unfortunate that we, scheduled this prior to knowing that COVID would be changed, and we probably could have done this in person, but I think it's still fun to do. And it's actually easier for everyone to see it in person or see it from their home and be able to listen in and get ready for the season, which is coming up. And yeah, I think it's going to be a fun year. I don't know about everybody else, but last year was definitely a little bit of a bummer not to see everybody in the way we're used to. And I think just, for all those who were on here at La Valette last week, and, a little sidebar, huge shout out to La Valette Yacht Club on the job they did at the regatta last week. Really fun to see everyone in a social setting, fun to be able to drink at the bar and talk about sailing like we did, in 2019. And, they definitely at LYC rolled out the welcome mat and really put on a show in terms of making everyone feel welcome and hospitality, and the sailing was fun. And it was good to just see how happy everyone was to sail in a quote unquote real regatta again and have a real experience. So hats off to everyone at LYC. It was a fun event last weekend. And I will say I had forgotten how bad the motorboat traffic is there on Saturday. We'll get to that in a bit, but there were a few times where I think we were going backwards because of the motorboat waves on Saturday, but we'll talk about that in a little bit too. So as Scott, please, if you have questions, just put them in the chat. It's easier than unmuting and muting, because once we start talking, it gets hard, but I will answer as many of the questions as I can, and probably all of them. The more questions we get, the better. I don't want to be a huge just staring at the screen for, however long this is going to go. And one thing I would point out, I know we were scheduled for a 2-hour session. We all know that 2 hours is too long to be on a Zoom call. So the goal is to keep this right around an hour and keep it informative. And Scott, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is being recorded. It should go up on the BBYRA YouTube channel or something like that. So if you want to watch it again, or have, whatever, want to see parts and pieces of it again, you'll be able to watch it. So here we go. We'll start off. And if those of you were at the one at Maniloking, a few years ago, I guess 2019 now. I was looking at the presentation 2 nights ago. And I was like, wow, this thing's actually pretty good. We should probably use parts of this again. So I updated part of it and kind of came up with some notes, some things of doing it. But I think, for me, the big thing to think about this time of year is, the season's coming up, and how are you going to make it the best season you can? And everyone's got different expectations of that. So my whole thing is how to elevate. And when I say elevate your game, it could just be your summer and fun of it. And, remember, this is what I tell everyone is, we talk about chasing roosters and all these things, that is important. But the whole thing is how to get, how do I put this? How to get the most satisfaction out of it without necessarily being fully results driven. And remember, I tell people there's plenty of races that you don't necessarily win the race, and there's plenty of races you win, but it wasn't necessarily your best race. And sometimes the goal is just figuring out how to sail the best race regardless of results. I'll talk about that a little bit because I had that this weekend. And I see Glenn Dixon's got the first question, and I will get to that about the rules for 2021. So what are we going to discuss? And we'll talk about a few photos or topics we're going to discuss, but I'm trying to make this a very broad spectrum of things that we're going to talk about how to make the season better. And it'll talk about some sailing in Barnegat Bay. We're going to talk about some starting. We'll talk about some going fast, just some general topics of, what you can do to make your sailing better for yourself. So this is the first thing I always tell everyone is you should have goals for the year. And one of the things, and I don't want to spend a ton of time on this, but I think it's down to think about what is the definition of success for you? What do you want to get out of it? And you have to have realistic expectations of where you are in your sailing. So I'll give an example. So the MC Scout has been new for me. And obviously it's my job to race the boat now. And, I started sailing the boat last year. The Easterns were coming up at La Valette last week. And it was funny. I sat down with this and I was like, so what is the definition of success at this regatta? Most people said, oh, you need to win or it's not a success. And it was kind of funny. My takeaway actually from last weekend was the Nationals are in 2 weeks in Iowa. That's the big prize, right? So what are the steps that I need to do to, get better? And a couple of them was just learning how to even win a race in this boat. I hadn't done it all winter, won one race over the whole series, did a few things, but that was an important step, just knowing that we were fast enough to do it. Surprisingly was when it was really windy, I wanted to see what it was like crew. So last weekend I got to sail the last race of the regatta, which in an odd way was the most important race of the regatta because it determined whether I won or not. But I sailed with my middle daughter, who's 9. Rory sailed in the last race with me. It was a really good experience. We win the regatta in the end? No, but it was a good learning thing. And it helped with the goals of, if I'm going to the Nationals in 2 weeks, what do I do? So, it was one of these things that if you didn't have the kind of what the steps of the progression are, you might have made a different decision. So if my full goal was win the Easterns no matter what, I might have left her on the powerboat and said, you know what, it's all or nothing to win this race. But I realized my long-term goal was to make sure that I know what my quiver of arrows is for the Nationals. And I was like, this is the only time it's been windy in 4 weeks. I've got to try it. So I put her on the boat. It did cost us in the end. I actually don't think it did, but you can make an argument. Maybe I shouldn't have done that. Who knows? But it was part of the whole process. And I think this is one of the things that is important for everyone this season. If your goal is to, if you're an ACAT sailor, win the Challenge Cup, you may have different, requirements building up to that. If your goal is to win the base season as in general, you may have different goals for that. If it's just to, I don't know, have a better result than last year, win a race, you may have different ways to get there. And I think that's important, is to set goals for yourself and actually be realistic about it. And a lot of people forget to do this, and that's where the frustration kind of comes in. I'm going to generally go through this, but when you talk about winning or doing well, I like to use this triangle because I actually think it illustrates it well, because without these components, you can't get to the top. And speed is the biggest one. And we've talked about this. Everybody's heard it. It's pretty hard to be smart if you're super slow. And defining how to get faster, what your strategy is, or what a strategy even is. And I think a lot of people know what it is, but they don't execute it. So we're going to go through these in a very general sense and talk about it. I want to talk about these generally, so when we get to other topics later, it's clear to everybody. And if I'm going fast, you want me to talk through this again, I can, but here's the definitions again of what I said. And I want to go through these one by one. Oh, went too fast. So speed. And this is one of the things that, we work really hard on being fast, right? So talking to the fast guys, and I think the one thing that the BBYRA has going for it, and it's very known for, and is a special quality of it, is everyone's pretty willing to share. And you see it amongst all the groups. And one of the classes, I'm going to probably talk about them a little too much, but the MC and the e-scout fleet, I would say both do a pretty good job of sharing info. And if you want to get up to speed, you got to talk to these guys and find out what they're doing. And everyone may have something different, but when you start kind of keeping notes, it's really important. So, and this is where, I think the second one is really key. Speed is different. Speed is a different thing for everybody because everyone has a different sailing style. And I'll give an example. So we're talking about sailing the MC Scout, and one of the top boats on the bay is Will Demand. And I've known him since we've been single digits in age, sailed junior sailing, the whole thing. He's been very successful in the MC. He got second in the midwinters a couple of years ago, and he's been sailing all these regattas, doing well, won the big regatta in the fall in the bay there. And I've been kind of picking his brain to find out how he sails the boat. And one of the things he's very adamant about is that he trims the main very hard, and he doesn't adjust the main sheet, but he adjusts the traveler. Works for him, which is great. Every time I've tried to do that, I can't make it work. It doesn't work for my sailing style. I feel much more comfortable sailing the boat much more like a Flying Scot, where you pull the vang on and you adjust the main sheet, and I kind of leave the traveler as a gross adjustment. Both of them work, right? I think the point of it is there's two different ways to skin a cat, but the reality of it is you have to do the research to find out what all the fast guys are doing and then figure out how to make it work for you. And I think this is one of the things that a lot of people forget is they think there's only one way to be fast, and it's just not true. It takes different ways of getting there. And for every boat, it may be slightly different, but it's very, refined. If you keep notes and you have an idea of how you want to do it, and you find people who do it that way, you can kind of get info. And I think it's really important if you got a new boat. And like for me, it's been refreshing to have this new boat to go through this process of learning, talking to people, get notes, learning tuning, do all these things. And doing that is critical. Keeping notes, it amazes me how many people don't keep notes. And what amazes me too is people don't write things down on their boat. And when I put this on to mark up the boat, it's pretty funny. I mean, just even arrows on the shrouds which way to turn them, or mast rake settings, or whatever it is. I mean, just write them on the boat. I mean, they're not going to go anywhere. Who cares? Put it under the deck, write it on the floor. It doesn't matter. But writing the stuff down is important. And I think if you notice the fast guys, they have marks on their sheets and all this other stuff. And I know it sounds generic, but we all forget to do it at the beginning of the year. This is the time to do it. So here's a good example for the e-scout, like of the tuning notes. And every class should have these. The MC has one. I'm sure that all the boats have them, but it kind of goes back into the reinforcing just having your rig settings. I mean, even boats like an Ensign have them, I'm sure. You do all these things, just kind of keep doing this so that you have repeatable settings and you're comfortable with them. The flip side to that, and this is where I think it's important, is having sail trim notes. And some of them are predetermined by your sailmaker, and we have them for some classes. But for other boats, you may not. So, I mean, we'll look at this as, this was, again, another e-scout notes, but you can keep your own chart of this. So like, I know for me, for every boat I sail, I have a notebook, and I'll keep notes of this stuff after sailing. If I was fast, or even worse, I write down what was slow, because I don't want to do that again, right? And you just kind of keep all this stuff in there. So that way, if you're, a year later, you're trying to get back to it, it's right there for you. And one of the things, I know this photo is not of a boat that we sail in the bay, but I think it's important to have markings, and it's hard to see, but like you can see things down here, like the jib car has numbers. On the vang, there's some different colored tape. On the jib sheet, you don't see it. There's marks here, but basically this is all done to make it repeatable. And I think that's one thing that everyone should realize. If there's things that get adjusted constantly, having a mark on there so you have a reference is crucial. So like one of the things I did even on the MC last week is I put a couple on the main sheet, not necessarily saying trim it there and cleat it. it was more of, okay, I'm going good. I just look down and say, all right, the mark is 2 inches below the main sheet block. Okay, good. Or if I'm not going good, I look down and go, oh, the main sheet's 4 inches away from the block. Maybe I should go back to that 2 setting and try that. And it kind of gives you quick references, because the worst thing that can happen, especially sailing in the bay, is having your head stuck in the boat. It's a very dynamic area. We're going to talk about this a little bit. And you got to just be ready for all that stuff. So I think these things are crucial for a lot of these boats. So strategy, and I've got a couple questions. Paul Magno actually asked me a question about this, and how things kind of go, and how do we prepare to know which way to go on the course. And I think that's the thing that, you know, we all talk about, and we try to ask why these guys do what they do and how the guys figure this out. And I've kind of basically based this on 2 things. So the basics, right? What is the course? Which we laugh. There are so many people who don't know what the course is when they start a race. It's crazy, right? You have to know the course and be very comfortable, you know what you're doing. And then it's just simple questions. Where's the best wind? What side of the course do you think is favored? And what side of the starting line is favored? If you get these 4 basic things wrapped around in your head, I would say 99% of people who sail can answer these questions accurately almost all the time. Almost everybody. The question is, then they don't do it, right? And I think that's the big, you know, getting this strategy part to me is very, I don't want to say common, but most people understand, especially in an area that you're familiar with, to get these questions. I like to then think there's other things to talk about, like weather trends and clouds and, you know, route planning if you're going offshore, but we're not going to talk about that, that also go to it. So I want to talk to you about this, because I think weather especially is crucial to what we do. So this is a weather forecast, and people see these all the time. I mean, how many people see this? This is a typical sail flow forecast, right? So when I look at this, I'm not looking at this of at 7 o'clock it's 4, at 8 o'clock it's 4, at 9 o'clock it's 5, at 10 o'clock, and that's not what I'm seeing here. So when I see this, I'm looking going, okay, we're racing, we're leaving the dock at 9 and we're racing till 5. So I see this as, okay, wind is increasing a small amount, but increasing throughout the day. But there's a definite shift to the right almost every hour, right? I mean, the forecast here is shifting to the right. Boom, 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 boom. So to me, I'm pretty hard pressed to think over the course of that day, okay, there may be a few left shifts, but over the course of the day, in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, wind is going to build and it's going to shift to the right. I mean, that's how I would take that forecast. And the one thing you can keep in mind is, okay, if at 1 o'clock, let's just say this is an easterly, right? Just roughly. If all of a sudden at 1 o'clock, it's not an easterly, maybe you start realizing, okay, the forecast is either totally crappy or it's gone too far and it needs to come the other way. And I want to talk about that. We'll talk about that later on about what happened this weekend. Here's a second forecast. And what I see here is, okay, race day is at 9 to 5. What I see is the wind is pretty steady and slight downtrend, but pretty much even, right? So to me, this is like your typical northwester that you see on the bay. Very steady general wind direction, but you can see big variety in pressure, 16 to 21, whereas over here it was 4 to 7, 5 to 7, 7 to 7, right? Barely any puffs. On this one, I'm seeing pretty big range in pressure, 5 knots on average, and the direction staying the same. So to me, I'm seeing that as a puffy, shifty day, pretty windy, but slowly dying. So I'm preparing for, okay, I've got to be on my toes. This is going to be just a shifty day. Don't worry about anything. Just react to the puffs and sail. Whereas the other one could be, all right, I'm going to probably try and protect the right as I'm doing it. So that's one of the things I tell people about these weather forecasting, how to deal with that. So when it comes to strategy, just keep those things in mind when it comes to weather. Tactics is a totally other separate thing. And we're going to talk about a lot of this here in a little bit, but tactics to me is, remember, strategy is your goal to get around the course as fast as you can if there was no other boats there. And tactics is how you're going to do it with the presence of other boats, right? So it's kind of using your ability to get around and do things. And these are all, you know, mental tactics is part of it. but starting and crossing and ley lines are all part of how you get around and how you manage this part of the race. So this one to me is very critical. And mental tactics. Remember, your goal is to sail from where you currently are, not where you think you should be. And this is a very, for those who sailed last weekend, it was a prime case of this. It was on Saturday, it was a southwest breeze. It was very shifty, very puffy. And it was very easy to look over your shoulder, let's say to the left, or look to the right, and you'll see that there's drastic gains and losses happening on the course. And it was very easy you would see people panic and be like, oh, that guy's lifted over there. And they would tack, sail to where that guy was. And by the time they get there, the wind is already gone. And where they were was basically lined up for the puff. So I always tell people, don't freak out necessarily about what you see other boats doing. You have to still focus of, I'm here, the mark is there, and how do I get there? And how do I get there? Don't worry about the other boats. It's connecting the wind and getting there from where you are, not where, it's a very easy thing to say, oh, I should have been in the left. I should have been in the left. I got to get to the left. Well, you're not in the left, you're in the middle. So how do you make it work from here? It's one of these things about letting bad decisions go to move forward. And I actually think it's the biggest difference between top teams or top boats and very average boats is that they don't chase it. They let the game kind of come to them. And it's one of these things that I constantly refer to people, especially early in the year. Everyone gets anxious. It's just a patience game, especially, believe it or not, when it's windy. It's the same thing. It's just being patient about the whole thing. So, all right. And this is one of my biggest pet peeves, and we're going to get into this. We talked about it before, but starting, to me, is like one of the basically keys to doing well. And the one thing that I get a little anxious about is that people tend to do three things. One, they ignore the favored end all the time, either because they're afraid of other boats or they don't realize what they're giving up. And I keep saying we're talking about this later, but I'm going to get to this in a second. And two, people don't have a routine. I mean, there are some people, I guarantee you, that are on this call, and we'll leave them unnamed, that are going to start at the pin end of the line no matter what, right? I mean, we all know this. There's plenty of them. I mean, I'm sure Peter Saya will tell you that he will always start at the pin, right? We know this. But you have to have a routine. And what happens is Jeff Benani was actually out coaching on Friday in Lavalette. We had a bunch of practice races. He was amazed how everyone was kind of haphazard about their starts. Like they didn't do anything the same way twice. And the guys who are getting successful starts, what they're doing is they're doing a repeatable thing over and over and over again, whether it's time on distance, whether it's port tack approaches, it's constant. It's a very similar thing. And I think boats that are strong at this generally do well. So, as I tell people, get a routine. It could be, whatever you're comfortable with, just figure it out and how to do that. And then having a hole or space is crucial. So this is the chart that blows everyone's mind, and I want to get into it, but let's focus the one on the left for a second. So assuming a boat here is 20 feet long and we're having a 15 boat race roughly. So in that equation, so a 20-foot boat, we'll say, is a Flying Scot, okay? 15 boats on a Flying Scot starting line, that's pretty common for, I think, a BBYRA weekend. And, the starting line might be 300 feet long, or, which is basically 15 boat lengths, a boat length per boat, which may be short, may be long, but let's just, for that, 10 degrees favored. And we all talk about this as many people are, going through it, and 10 degrees doesn't seem like a lot. Race committees are definitely going to tell you it's not a lot, right? They're going to let it go. But right here, I mean, just by doing this formula, I mean, you're talking about 2.6 boat lengths of gain from a 10-degree favored line on a 15-boat Flying Scot starting line, right? So 2.5 boat lengths is a lot of distance. I mean, how many times have you gotten the windward mark, and 2.5 boat lengths was the difference between 8th and 1st? It's a lot, right? So I'm not saying you need to win the favored end all the time, because when you get back to, back down the line a little bit, it's not as drastic. You figure the middle of the line is only 1 boat length favored. So if you start in the middle, you're only losing a length. But if you're on the total opposite end of the line, you're losing 2.5 boat lengths. That's a lot. And think of it this way. So like the MC regatta this week, let's say boats are roughly 20 feet, but we had 40 boats. So if you double this or even triple it, you know, if the boat or the pin end was 10 degrees favored, you're talking about almost what, 7, 8 boat lengths favored to one end of the line. It's a lot. It's a huge number. So two things is that I remind people all the time, have to know which end the favorite end is. And I'm not saying you have to win the favorite end, but you got to be in that direction. And two, just remember for race committees, man, if you don't think a little bit of one end favored is a lot, you start looking at these numbers, it's a lot. I mean, when you start even getting to, God forbid, 20 degrees of an end of the line favored, you start talking about 5 or, you know, whatever it is, 10, 20 degrees favored, huge numbers of boat lengths, it becomes a problem. So this is the one thing I constantly remind people, just know where the favorite end is and try to be at least in that half of the line, because you give away a ton of distance, an absolute ton. And this goes back to the routine of just kind of knowing what you want to do. I don't want to spend a ton of time on this, but you know, for all of you folks out there, it's a, you know, it's just something to be aware of. Does anybody else have any questions? And Glenn, I'm going to get to your question in a second, but later on, if anybody else has questions, just put them in the chat. And I apologize if I'm going fast here, but here we go. This is the other thing that I think is critical for a lot of folks, and everyone understands having space, okay? And this is where I think this graphic is really good. When you making sure you don't have too much room, and I'm going to draw on here, so pardon me as I do this. Hold on. There we go. So like this distance here, and the reason why this is important is, you know, it's not big enough to put another boat here, right? So that's a good amount of space, and that's kind of what this is trying to show. You're high enough off of here to, you're high enough off of this boat to leeward to have a hole for yourself, but not enough room for everyone else. What happens is if you tack up here, doing bad with my drawing here. Hold on. If you do another, if you're up here, what happens is when this boat is here, right? They see this and they go, oh, I'm not going to go there, not enough room. But they go down here and they tack here. Why do they do that? Because you left them all this room. So they still now have all this room down here. Even if this guy was here, if this guy tacks here, they left enough room for this guy to have space. And this is the one thing I always tell folks, if you're coming down the line, you see this, I'm going to tack, if I'm this guy and only this boat, if A and B are already in place and I'm boat C, I'm going to come in and tack here and leave only this amount of room instead of tacking here. Because if I tack here, when boat D comes, they're going to go there. But if you tack here, boat D is going to keep going. I don't know if that makes sense to everybody, but I think it's a crucial part of, you can have a starting lane that's too big. And that's one of the crucial things to manage when you want to get good starts. And now I got to figure out how to erase all this. Pardon me, I'm a little my Zoom annotations are a little weak. I'm sure there's a quicker way to do this, and if somebody knows, they can tell me. All right. Okay. This is the other thing that I think is very important to think about, and as you're preparing for the season, and it's crossing situations. And when I do this, and it was interesting because, you know, when you sail, for me on the MC, it's interesting because you have inner monologue, right? Whereas when you're sailing with other people, you're verbally talking about these situations. So it actually made an interesting kind of dynamic of how it works, but I'll move forward. When two boats are crossing, they're clearly going in different directions, right? One boat's on starboard, one's on port, one's going one way, one's going another. And when that happens, it should be a trigger. Okay, why am I doing what I'm doing? And why are they doing what they're doing? And am I doing the right thing? It should just be a quick circle of questions. I want to keep going this way. There's better wind. I think he's going the wrong way. We're going to keep going. Done. It could be, all right, I got flushed onto this tack. I want to get on starboard. I want to get back on the other tack as soon as I can. I see this guy coming. I can tack to leeward of him. I agree with him going that way. I tack now. And it's just, it should be a constant decision tree of two boats are meeting. Okay, I'm going to tack. I'm going to duck. I'm going to do whatever it is. But constantly thinking about, why is the other boat doing what they're doing? Why am I doing with what they're doing? And keeping that going. Because if you start just aimlessly sailing, that's where you lose boats all the time, right? Every crossing situation is a chance to either gain or lose on the pack. So keep that in mind. The other thing to remember is that there is a chain of events, right? So if two boats are meeting and you decide, I'm going to duck. Well, if you're going to make the decision to duck, there has to be a thought of, okay, well, if I'm going to duck, I'm going to look behind, because once I duck, I may not cross the next guy. And that might mean I'm going to have to duck him because I can't tack between them. So your decision might then be like, okay, I'm not ducking two boats, I'm going to tack. So the thing I keep reminding folks is, remember, every decision is going to impact the next one down the line, and just kind of keep thinking 3-4 moves ahead to make sure that in the chain of events, it goes cleanly. And then execution. And execution is one of these things where it drives me crazy, and I'll annotate it again here on the draw. And I apologize for this, but when two boats are kind of meeting here, and we'll say the wind's coming from the top, execution of two things is crucial. How you duck, right? And then if you're going to tack, how you tack is crucial. And I tell folks this all the time. If you're going to tack here, make sure that you're getting a good tack, and that you're going to at least you tack as close to the starboard tack as you can, but as long as you're bow out. If you end up tacking and you're bow back, you're better off being further away, but being bow forward, right? Always want to be bow forward. If you're going to duck, make the turn early enough so that when you go behind them, you're close hauled here. You don't want to be aiming this way when you're here, because by the time you finish your turn, you've given up too much distance. So I always tell folks, whenever these crossings happen, all of these things add up as making sure that you have to have the proper maneuvers and not give away too much distance in a cross, because that is the difference between winning or doing really well and not in a lot of races. I think that's pretty clear to everybody. So ley lines, I don't think everybody kind of knows them. My only comment on this would be, especially for sailing in the Bay Area, is two things. One, ley lines get very tricky because of the motorboat situation from a couple standpoints. One, you can lose speed very quickly. And two, it gets really hard on the bay, in my opinion, to be on a ley line for a long time, because I think it's quite shifty, and getting on a ley line extended is really difficult, because generally if someone tacks on you, you don't have room to go, or generally you're close to a shoreline. So I always tell folks, if it's me, I'm avoiding ley lines in our race courses as early or until as late as possible. And when we have the chart up, I want to talk through that. But I really want to talk about sailing on the bay, and there's a couple things that I think are important. One is how the sea breeze works. Two, I like calling it the maker effect, but it's really the whole bay is kind of like a lake, and kind of the different northerly breezes, and then your boat setup, which I think is crucial for sailing at home. So here's a good chart of the bay, and to me, I think there's a few things that are very unique about it, and we take, I don't want to say take for granted, but we don't think about, but it's very true if you think about it in a bigger picture. In that first, let me see if I can figure out how to do this. Hopefully you guys can see the pointer. This part of the bay, Wanamaker and Seaside, relatively speaking, is pretty small. That's why I like laughing at calling this Lake Wanamaker, because the Wanamaker course is quite confined. There's shore on every side. There's a channel going through it with motorboats. It's very small with a river feeding into it. Same thing with the Seaside course. It's a pretty small circle followed by shallow water. The only difference is if a southerly comes in, it has this big open area blowing onto it. The northern end of the bay is slightly different, where it has two big areas, but you've got a lot of points of land that stick into it, which again gives you lake sailing. There's a lot of different wind directions and things that could happen to me, unless it's a sea breeze. And the sea breeze is the one that I think is very important to really understand. And this happened this weekend. So on Sunday, the westerly held in, but the sea breeze started to finally fill in. And this to me is how, if you look at any map, this is how a sea breeze fills in. It's a southeasterly direction. It's windier on the ocean. It slows down over the land and then fills in across the bay. This is a very typical situation, probably from about 155, 160 to 170 is the wind direction for very typical sea breeze. The other thing that happens, and you see it, is the puffy clouds form on the western shore, right? Generally speaking, we're not going to see a sea breeze fill in until you start seeing the puffy clouds. So it was funny, everyone was taking bets on when the sea breeze was going to fill in. And it was like within minutes of the puffy clouds, the breeze filled in. Until there was no puffy clouds, nothing happened. But what then generally happens is once it fills across the bay, it shifts to this right and it goes to south, and then maybe a touch southwest, like in this, and then it generally builds. And what happens here is kind of the old, all the old, I guess, adage of getting towards the shore is generally true, except in a couple situations, and we had this weekend. So most of the time when the sea breeze fills, the pressure comes from the left, and that would be a stronger, how do I put it, pressure line coming off as it fills across. But there was one key to what happened this weekend. So when the wind filled on Sunday, the sea breeze filled in around 130 direction. And the first mark was, I'll try and draw it. Like the wind direction was more like this. And what was happening is, the race was, maybe it wasn't quite like that. It was more halfway. Anyway, you get the gist of it. 130 instead of 160. What really happened there in my mind is that when it filled, yes, there was more pressure, but it immediately triggered to me that it was too far to the left. And as soon as it got in, I was like, it's going to take a bump to the right pretty quick to get to 165. So the race started and the boats at the pin were really strong early, like really strong. And there was more pressure on the left. We were up under this island here on the Lavalette side. And within half a leg, I kid you not, it went 20 degrees to the right, back to this 165 number. And as soon as that happened, the boats on the right immediately became strong on the boats to the left. They just all got 20 degrees headed, and the boats in the middle and the right came, just running across. And then once the breeze got even across the course, it did the whole 180, 190. I think the last race we started at 190, and at the end of the race, it was 200. But I think this is where getting used to having, how do I put this? Getting used to what these numbers should be, and then it should be a trigger. So you could see like, and again, like a bunch of the local boats triggered right away that it was too far to the left and they got right. And the boats from out of town were eagerly going to the beach to try and get more pressure, and the wind went back to the right. So it's one of these things that I think as long as you're comfortable in the sea breeze, realizing that the normal quote unquote sea breeze number is that 160, that if you see a 140, it's probably gonna go to the right. And if it fills in at 180, there's a chance as it builds, it's gonna do an early left shift back to 160, fill across and go then back to the right again. So it's one of these things that we all see it and we all like, oh, it's a sea breeze, go left early, go right late. But it can be, there's more to it if the direction's different. And last weekend, actually, which was funny for this discussion, was a prime case of that. Going back to this, so I do think, and I know I get in trouble for saying that it's like sailing on a lake all the time, but when the wind's coming from the south, it clearly is not, right? It's windy, it's beautiful, it's why we all love sailing there. I get it. And trust me, there's nobody who likes sailing in a sea breeze more than I do. And it's fun and it's straight line, you go fast, you hike, you get all salty. It's great. Trust me, it's great. The sailing, when we get either directions this way or anything out of this, general direction, westerlies, we get these big, shifty, puffy days, right? And each course is slightly different. So I think when you're on this course, the one thing that's different is when you get a westerly, you get this funnel down the river. It's a little different under here, but there's a lot of things to do, right? So you have two definite different situations. And usually what happens in my mind is it's knowing when to cross over kind of this boundary of this breeze to here, depending on where the mark is. And I know I'm probably going to be told I'm wrong. And to me, this course in a westerly is very specific on where the course is set up. So to me, long point is a huge one. If I see the mark inside a long point, I'm probably going to hedge my bets to wanting to be under, to be on this half of the course. If I see the mark on this side and it's more skewed this way, I'm probably going to hedge more towards the riverside, knowing that this is where you're going to end up and that's where the wind's going to be. It's a very unique situation when it's in the middle and it's like right on the point and the wind's coming out, all bets are off, right? One side's going to win one time, one's going to win another. And it's got to be, eyes out of the boat type situation. If you're on the seaside course and you have these directions, it's just very, again, if the wind's going this way, again, it's very shifty, puffy until the wind gets a little bit to your upwind right and it starts bending around this point. Then you got to be a little careful of watching this right side, right? Because you can get some, right hand shifts at the top of the leg getting around this point, which does happen quite a bit. On this past weekend, we actually on Saturday and I hadn't raced in it before. We had a southwesterly breeze, which was light, but we were way up in here. I'm trying to get my bearings here with the islands. I mean, the race course was like in this area right here. And I actually thought pretty unique about it is you get these really big blasts of colder air going like this, and you get some big right or left side of the course shifts. But in the end, you'd get a big thing coming out of this bay, and you'd see the boats would go right early and left late would do really well on this course. Over here, it could be totally different, but you get the same effect as the river here where things are flowing out, and you have to be careful of the outflow of these creeks and rivers onto the course. So I actually think it's pretty cool. We're lucky that this is an area we sail because it's very dynamic and not very boring. And I think it gives us a lot of opportunity to become better sailors because it's not the same all the time. And I think I think about, I sail here in Annapolis, and anybody who's from Annapolis will yell at me for saying this, but it's pretty boring when we know that no matter which way the wind blows, we're going to go to the left all the time because it works 99% of the time because of current and the way the land is. So the whole goal here is to start and go as far left as you can, overstand the mark and go. And that's all we do. I mean, it's pretty boring, right? But I think the awesome part about here is no matter what you get a pretty dynamic situation, and it's not, there may be patterns, but it's not when this happens, do this, when this happens, do this. It's a very open-ended thing. And people who are what I would say creative tend to do pretty well here. So that's what I think about localized sailing. And the other thing to me, that I learned this, again, relearned this past weekend, is just being aware of the clues. So the same thing, when you see clouds over here, you're going to get, the sea breeze time in the dying westerly. You're not going to get it until you get the clouds here, or especially if it's hazy. The other thing that we talk about is the weather. And I do actually believe, just watching it, that the sail flow forecasts for the area have gotten significantly better. So if you're using that as your weather app, it's quite good. So that would be another thing to keep in mind. So going back to my original thing, so sailing on the bay, it does have one unique thing, and we all say it here, and this is the highway of powerboats, right? This is the pink line of death here, which is the channel that goes through the bay. And it does create, to me, an interesting phenomenon in terms of how you set up your boat. And I think generally speaking, it's an area where we have a lot of motorboat chop, and we have a lot of how do I put it? Man-made reverberation, right? There's not a lot of natural shoreline anymore. There's a lot of bulkheads. So what happens is as soon as there's waves, even if it's wind-made waves, you get a lot of bouncing off of the shoreline back into the bay, right? It's shallow, so you get a lot of confused, basically water movement. So one of the things that I definitely keep in mind is how to make sure the boat is always maybe more powered up for the conditions than you would think. So, you know, a lot of people we talk to, whether, you know, basically it doesn't matter the classes, maybe sailing with, you know, a little less outhaul on, or the sheets a little eased, or anything to keep the boat moving through chop. And you guys already know this way more than I do, but just making sure that you're erring on the side of more chop or more power than less, especially, you know, the lighter the air gets, because getting through the waves is crucial. I mean, again, going back to the MC this weekend, I was thinking about it as, man, you had to play the outhaul as much as the main sheet just to keep the sail on max full to get through the waves, because there were times where you were literally going backwards, or you had to take a tack to get away from, you know, when Rodney Dangerfield was coming through with his big powerboat, so you didn't sink, you know. So keeping all these things in mind is pretty important to me, I think, and it makes sailing here rewarding, because there's a lot going on in my book there. So yeah, so a couple things I think is, again, key, and I've probably gone a little fast here, but you know, teams succeed when, and these are three things that I think are really important. Is one, never giving up, and that's important for everybody. But I think number two is important, is knowing your role, and this actually goes towards a lot of the skippers out there that are listening in. Is if your goal is to be the skipper, your goal is to just drive the boat as fast as you can, right? It's not to micromanage every single part of the operation. So if you are driving the boat and you trust the people around you, you have to just focus on steering. Or if you're the bow person, you have to focus on being the best bow person you can be and not worry about doing other things. And I think as you think about the season, and we're all getting back to it, is just remembering that part of it. And you know, attitude is working towards success. So, you know, again, it's making sure that it's, you know, one step forward all the time. It's not one step forward, two steps back, and how to keep that attitude of, okay, well, we had a little punch here, we're going to move forward. You know, every time we take a step back, how to keep moving forward. And the teams that do that generally do better. And I think the thing that's funny is people worry about that they can't influence that, but it takes one person on the boat to drag this down. And for all of you out there, I mean, you know what it's like when someone on the team is a little bummed. You have to bring them up with you, because otherwise it gets hard. This is something I think that is really important, and I try to tell you can't substitute for time on the water, right? So we have, I don't know how many days left, 17. I think I saw an email, 17 days left till the first race. Does that sound right? So we got 17 days until the first race. And, you know, with the way the scoring goes and drops and all these things, getting ahead early in the season is always important, right? So if I had my way, I would spend as much time in the next 17 days sailing as I could, if your goals were to do well, and, you know, really focus on just making sure you're ready to go for race number one of the season. And, you know, as I tell people, don't waste money or time on things that don't help you do better. And I think there's a common thing in sailing, is everybody's worried about spending money on stuff that's cool or flashy, or, you know, spending time cleaning this up or cleaning that up. You know, none of us have infinite amounts of time to waste on this stuff, and, you know, or money. And with 17 days to go, I'd be prioritizing getting on the water, and then any part of the boat that needs to be done to make the boat faster before any of the other flashy stuff, right? Because the flashy stuff comes later. So don't waste, you know, these resources that you have, and times like, you know, that you have to do these things to do that. Yeah, I mean, seems pretty basic, but there's that. So again, going through this, and I'm hoping we have more questions because I went through this quicker than I had planned. Have goals, you know, and be flexible and have fun and do all these things. So I'm going to go back to Glenn's question on the rules. So to me, the rules for this year, in my mind, basically a lot of it was definitional change. I think the other thing the biggest change in my thing, and I'm not a rules expert. Please don't go to a protest and say Allan Terhune told me this is what happens, because I am not claiming to be a judge or a rules expert, but this is the way I understand it. And Tom Solis explained this to me, and maybe he would be a better person to explain it. But I think the biggest change, going back to Glenn's question, is if you are in a situation where you are fouled and it causes you to foul someone else, or let's give an example. Let's say you are in a situation where you are owed room at a mark and you ask for room, you don't get enough room, and you hit the mark. In the old rules, even if you hit the mark because you didn't get enough room, theoretically, and I'm going by this is how I understand it, not necessarily I'm correct. If you hit a mark because someone fouled you, in the old days, you still had to exonerate yourself and protest them. Under new rules, I believe if you hit a mark because someone fouled you, you just do your thing and protest the other boat and move on. Or if there's, an incident that causes you to foul someone else, you don't have to clear yourself anymore to do that. There can just be a protest or do something along those lines. That's the way I understand it. I think that as being the biggest change, I'm not sure I'm 100% correct on that, but I'm 99.99% sure that's how it's supposed to be. So I think, I think it's one of these things that, I think they cleaned up the definitions, but the one part that's clear is if another boat fouls you, you don't have to exonerate yourself. And if someone protests you, you can go in there and say, well, the other boat fouled me, and the protest committee can make that decision on their own. And there isn't a whole chain of, I have to protest this guy to protest this guy to protest this guy. It doesn't work that way anymore. It's how it was explained to me. We'll see how that works in reality, but that is the biggest change that I got out of it. The other thing I think is just definitional things about tacking and some other things that I don't know enough about and I try to avoid. But when it comes to rules in my book, I think you have two things to look at it, right? World Sailing and all these organizations that come up with the rules are using rules as a way of keeping boats apart, right? We as racers have determined that rules are to be used as a weapon to gain an advantage. It's just the way we all are, right? So just keep in mind that when these things were designed, they were designed to keep the boats apart. We're the ones who keep trying to force them together, and this is where we have an issue. So I always tell people I sail with is we avoid rule situations at all costs, because A, you don't ever trust the jury, and B, it was just, it's too much of a crapshoot of knowing what the other boat is going to do. The easiest thing to do is avoid those situations. So that would be my 2 cents on that, and hopefully it works out for everybody over the summer and does these things. So anyway, there's my little spiel that went pretty quick. Does anybody have any questions or things they want to talk about? I don't see too many. Well, I think it's I would say before I leave you is I think just remember how lucky everyone who sails on the bay has it. We had a tough summer last summer. This summer is going to be awesome. I think everyone should be thrilled to get out. There's some cool races and things going on. I mean, I know I'm going to sound a little partial, but it's really exciting about Tom's River's 150th anniversary this year. And I know that's a big deal for everyone on the bay. So I think that'll be cool to see how that all shakes out. And, there's a lot of good things happening. The East Scout fleet is strong. All the fleets are actually getting stronger. I think, if my dad can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think last year was an attendance upswing, even during COVID. Is that correct? You can shake your head. Yep. So, that just means that the future is super bright, and that, my only takeaway is to figure out, now that COVID's over, is how to make it even more social than it used to be. And that it, getting more kids involved and getting more people out there is kind of the important part. So good. Now we have some questions. Sorry, I got distracted by seeing them. So Glenn Dixon asked, was I surprised it wasn't windier on Saturday? We didn't see more than 12 knots until we were sailing in. Seemed like Southwest was too far left to get a good outflow for sea breeze. Kind of the same thing Sunday. Sounds like it was different compared to Lavalette. And then Mark Lewis asked, the start this weekend were strange. how did you handle them? So we'll take these two questions. So going to Glenn's question, Saturday, I wasn't necessarily surprised it was as light as it was, mainly because I think we all got tricked into believing that it was so hot that the sea breeze had to fill in and pump in the air. And what I think actually happened is that it was so hot, the hot air just came off the land with such force from the west that it didn't allow the sea breeze to actually mix. So every time it would, like, the hot air would run off the land, like we call it a drainage wind, right? It drains off the land onto the water. There was so much hot air, it was just causing that 10 to 12 knot breeze. And then when it would die a little bit, the sea breeze would push and the cold air would come, and then the hot air would just come right back and push it back. And I think that's what happened on Saturday, because it wasn't quite, I actually think the temperature differential was so big that the hot air just kept pushing its way off the land onto the shore. Instead of doing the opposite of sucking the cold air in, the hot air was pushing itself over the top. I did think it was odd, but I guess it does happen. It was more of to be honest, it felt like a Chesapeake Bay phenomenon more than a Barnegat Bay one, but it did happen. Mark's question is, the starts were strange and how'd you handle them? And I agree. So the starts to MC Regatta were a little strange in the fact that two things. One, there was a lot of boats and that was tough to manage. And two, generally speaking, the wind was really shifty. So because the shifts were so big, it made it so the line would be square and then it would be favored to one end and then it would be favored to the other end pretty drastically within a starting sequence. So kind of was random chance. It ended up being more pin favored than boat favored most of the day. But if you watch the average of the wind, it would go through about 25 degrees. So it would be, square, then it'd be 10 degrees favor of the boat. Then all of a sudden it was 15 degrees favor of the pin. Then it was kind of square. Then it would go back to the pin. Then it would go back to the boat. So my way of approaching it, I don't know if it was right because obviously I didn't win, but just finding a place on the line where I had enough space and that I could tack when I needed to. And unfortunately, I made it like race one, I made an error of thinking that the space was at the boat end. It came in really hard from the left and everyone at the pin tacked across, and I was pretty much in trouble from the first race. The second couple races, fought more towards the middle to have a lane and, do that. So I think that was the hard part on that. Sunday's racing was strange in starting, and the fact that it felt like the windier it got, all the boats kept clumping towards the boat end like it was a safety net. So the boat end became really crowded and there was a lot of space on the mid and pin end of the line. And there's some videos on the MC page that you can see some of the racing from the weekend. If you look, the pin end of the line was very open on Sunday because I think it was windier. They were afraid of tacking to port and getting stuck in irons. So everyone kind of luffed on starboard early and they kind of grouped towards the boat end. So there was a little bit of opportunity there to do that. So that was another interesting takeaway from the weekend. So I'm glad, Mark, you brought that up and do that. And yes, Lisa, you are correct. COVID is not over. I meant the way people are able to at least go sailing now and do things. That is a correct statement. I am corrected on that. But people are able to go out and do stuff and have regattas. Yes, people should do what they need to do and follow the New Jersey laws this coming summer. The last three starts on Saturday were strange ones. Each had a different wind, and that is true. That's the other thing. I'm glad Mark brought this up. Is on Saturday with the southwest wind, it was there was, how do I verbalize this correctly? On the pin end, you would have one wind direction, and the boat there was definitely another. And this is where it got tricky, was figuring out which wind to pick that would win over. So for me, when I was looking at that, it was basically, again, figuring out which one that we thought would last the longest and which one that was easier to stay in. So for race, whatever last three races, it'll be 3 and 4. It was pretty apparent that you had to get off the pin end of the line because the left side was stronger. In race 5, actually, the boats that started in the middle or the boat end did pretty well considering they got a more westerly push and they were able to get up the right side of the course. So that was really a good one for me.
Hey, Alan, it's Scott.
Yeah.
I'm going to jump in.
Sure.
Gary Stort says thank you, and never sail an ACAT, but he's happy you're here. Jim Leggy says great job. Hope to see you soon. More
Awesome.
importantly, the Commodore has asked, what do you think about the dog leg, and what are the tactics for the dog leg finish, which we're going to do in our AM finish, AM starts?
Well, I think the dog leg is hopefully it's windy because that'll make it fun. I think the only thing that will change on that, and I'll try and draw here. If I understand it correctly, basically you're gonna have a mark. Correct me if I'm wrong. The boat will be like this. Wind's coming here. So it'll be downwind and in like that. Is that correct? Basically.
That's correct, except the start boat will be on the other side. That mark that you have will be off the bow of the starboard side of the start boat.
So it'll be boat,
which will now be the finish boat.
It'll be like that.
Turn. Yep. No, you're fine. Where you did is fine.
Okay.
But
it's a turn this way.
Yep. It's a 60 degree, roughly 60-degree turn that way.
So the only thing that changes is it basically, and the other ones you have a gate, right? So you're basically able to turn and go one way or the other. The only thing that I think from a tactical thing changes is just remembering that this bottom mark becomes a port rounding singular mark, right? So, it changes your tactics back to the old way of racing. Whereas if there was no gate and you only had a singular mark, you were always fighting for the inside to have room to get around this mark. Well, the same things are going to apply with the dog leg now, in that your whole goal now is to be the inside boat on this turn as you do.
Preliminarily, I think we made the right decision.
So that would be the one, difference to me.
Yes, by the way.
When there's a gate, you can kind of split and go either way. When you have this mark, it's now a port rounding, make the turn and kind of go. So
I will help you. Yeah, just tell me what it is.
I hear somebody, but I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not.
Dan is talking. Dan, can you mute yourself or ask a question, please?
All right. I'll mute.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Scott, you had asked me to unmute. Basically, the finish line is going to be between the standard start finish boat is staying in position, and the way you drew it the first time out was correct. So the start boat will be where it always is. The tomato that used to be the finish line will be to the starboard of the start boat, and then that'll be the turning mark. It won't be the gate. So in other words, they're going to come down and turn left at what used to be the old finish pin, and then they're going to go to that finish line like you drew it, with the start boat and the bubble creating a reaching finish line where one is over the other. So you
have a boat.
Yeah.
You have a mark over here.
Over where?
Other side.
No, that would be, now go from the mark that you're drawing to the left. You just drew a mark, right? Draw the mark. Now go to the left of that mark and draw the start boat.
There you go.
Okay. Now, when you come down, you're going to turn the mark. No, the other way. You're going to turn that mark to port and then go over, and there'll be a ball behind this first boat you drew. Correct?
Perfect. Right there.
There you go. So
And there'll be a boat here. Yep.
Right.
There's two boats.
Right. The gate's going to be above that other start line.
The
Yeah.
gate's up here. Yeah.
Perfect.
So either way, going back to your tactics of this is just remembering this is basically just a singular port rounding.
Yes.
Right. And that's the important part to me, is just make sure, because the wind's coming here. I think the last thing you want to do is be, if you're rounding with boats like this and there's a guy behind like there, and there's three boats, this guy's probably going to get passed by this guy by the time they make this pinwheel turn and come out. So you have to fight for this inside turn to make this little reach across. And then the guesstimating game is figuring out what's the shorter distance, that or that. So, it'll be really important for the crews to kind of figure out if this is a little skewed and this mark is here, it may be a shorter distance to go low and go to there versus going high and get to the boat. And if this mark is out directly astern, you may have to get up to the boat quicker because the time you sail all the way down here, you might lose boats. So really understanding, to me, and I'll try and figure out how to. The key to the teams doing it is knowing if this is basically a right angle or not, right? Because if it's a right angle, it doesn't matter. You just go anywhere and finish. If it's not a right angle, then you got to get to the favorite end quick, and you want to do it from this high road position, right? Because it's going to be really hard to sail under people to get to this other mark.
Okay, now the question that just came out was, why are we doing this? And the simple answer is, last year we ended up with more boats sailing in the morning than we had in several years, which is a nice problem. But when everybody was finishing at the old finish line, we had a very difficult time reading sail numbers because multiple fleets were finishing at the same time at that finish line. And then we were faced with another problem. We couldn't actually start other fleets and get them out right away because there were so many boats entering into the starting area coming from the finish line. So what this little dogleg did, or what we're hoping that it does, is it creates a situation where the readers can read the sail numbers and get them to the scoring, so we can do the scoring more accurately and quicker and get them up on the site faster, which would make everybody happy. And also it gives the PRO the opportunity to say, okay, all the MCs are in, let's get them out again, instead of waiting for, the M's and the, lasers or whatever that are all piling into the finish line, and they're going to be at the pin end of the starting area. So we're trying to we're trying to solve two problems by doing this dogleg. So read the sailing instructions. It's pretty explanatory.
Like, next asking to be unmuted.
No, Alan, I think you're absolutely right. The aspect of this is to get it more square as we do this. Not to be 60, but as close to 90 degrees as you possibly can be, so you don't have a fast lane or a slow lane.
Right. My presenting side of the house, I don't have any more for everybody, but I appreciate everyone taking the time and listening in. I hope to see everyone this summer. I hope to get out for at least a few races and do a few things, and maybe get to come to Seaside and do some more sailing this summer. And it's fun for me, at least having MC, so I can at least get back and do a few races, and knowing that the Nationals are on the Bay next year, I think is exciting for all you guys. I'm not trying to give the MC too much of a push here, but for long, they're breaking the class record of 110 boats at the Nationals this year, which are in Iowa. And a lot of that is due to the New Jersey Barnegat Bay contingent going out there. And I think the folks at Lavalette don't realize that they may be having the 100+ boat onslaught hitting Barnegat Bay next summer when the Nationals are there. So I think there's a lot of cool stuff happening in the Bay with them. And it's good to see. I heard almost all the ACATs are back in the water this year, and all the other classes are picking up boats. I know the E-Scouts have their Nationals in Little Egg this week, starting on Wednesday, and there's a lot of good things going on. So I'm happy for everybody to see that sailing's doing well, and everyone's having fun, and hopefully everybody gets to the clubs and drinks some beers and talks sailing again and does what they need to do. I think it's great. So
Alan, this is Scott. It looks like I'm Trisha, but I'm really not Trisha. I'm Scott. And I thank you for everything you did for us tonight.
No problem.
There's one more question I'm going to ask Alan and Ned maybe to answer for Guy. But Alan Jr., thank you so much.
No
It's
problem.
great to have you on the Bay. I love watching local guys go at it, and this weekend was a great example.
Yep. And if you guys need me for anything, my email and phone number there, we're glad to help. And, you know, North Sales has, don't forget that Jeff Bonanni and Ron, both in New Jersey full-time, are working with the team. So you have two really awesome resources for everybody there who are there full-time. So don't forget to chat up Ron, and he's still around from when he and Henry Bossett were running North Sales New Jersey, and Jeff joined us this year and do it. So yeah, there you go.
Hey, Alan
Alan,
Sr. and Ned, could you address Guy's question? It's in the chat. How long do you think the dog leg will be in relationship to the leg and the line? Not sure what that means, Guy, but
I don't envision that thing being more than 70 yards, maybe. It's going to be pretty short. And Ned is correct. We're going to be working on setting that up so the angle is, you know, a pretty good reach, so people can get out to the finish quickly. The sale numbers can be read easily, and that way we can, you know, because we have 7 fleets to get off in the morning for the second race. So as they separate coming down, you know, because they always separate, this way we can get people out without waiting around. I mean, we did have some starts in the past 2 years. I know 2 years ago when we were running, you know, the full boat for 10 weeks, we had some weeks where the M Scouts went off first, you know, because they finished, because their course was shorter than the MCs, and we would get them out instead of make them wait around. You know, the worst thing as a ex-sailor is the time that you waste between races. So one of the things that we're trying to do on the Bay is have you all spend more time racing and less time waiting. So, and this is one of the new things that we're going to try and use to help combat that.
Exactly what Alan said. We try to do anywhere so from 5 to 7 boat lengths, and that's about all we really need.
Yeah, I mean, I've raced on a couple of race courses where they do this. It's usually 50 yards long. Takes 30 seconds to do this part of the race. It's just kind of a little housekeeping cleanup to kind of direct boats around. It's not a huge game changer, honestly.
And Lisa, I want to address yours. Thank you so much for reminding us to be cautious. I recommend everyone, if you haven't, get vaccinated. Our household has. And Lisa, you're correct. It's not over. We need to be careful, but God bless us. We're getting closer and closer to normal every day, but you should be careful.
Agreed.
Agreed.
Again, we're 17 days away, and everybody, let's make it a point to try and get back to the host clubs this year and rekindle that Bay spirit of everybody getting together and talking sailing. And there's nothing like watching sailors stand near a bar and watching the hand language. It's always been fun to be a part of. So let's support all of our clubs and all of our classes and get out there and have fun. Sailing is fun.
Yep.
Is there anything else? Ned, anything else? I'm going to close us out unless somebody else has something else to add.
I'm good. Thank you. Thanks for everything you did, Ellie.
Thank you, guys.
Alan, thank you. All right. I think we're closing out. Alan and Alan, thank you. Ned, thank you. Talk to you soon, both.